Everyone, welcome back to my channel Learn at Cloud Analytics. This video is going to be an end-to-end implementation of a Power BI report. So either you're a beginner or you have just started with Power BI but having trouble in implementing a complete Power BI project, then this video is for you. Hi, I'm Sailaja, and if you're a returning viewer, I truly appreciate your time and effort to continue with your learning journey. But if you're a new viewer watching my videos for the first time, I sincerely request you to please do like and subscribe, and do not forget on the bell icon to help you get notified to such exciting content I post on my channel. So in this video, we would take you from being a novice to an expert in Power BI. So for this, we are going to break it down and make it super easy for you as we take you through a step-by-step process within Power BI. So without any delay, let's get into the demonstration part. So this is the end element that we'd be focusing out in this complete video. So as you see, I have already created a demo part of it to demonstrate what we are going to expect by the end of this particular video. Okay, so as you see, we are going to analyze a sales data set where we would be creating a lot of KPIs along with certain understanding of how the sales has been doing based on a county or customer name and product name, and also by a time range. So we also have placed some slicer filters on the top of this visualization where you can just slice and dice the visuals based on the filter selection. So you can just select that particular timeline, and based on which the data within the visuals are getting updated automatically. So isn't this fancy? So let's get into this video to understand how we can connect to this particular data set and evaluate it and try to build this report as we go along. So for the first thing that we have to do is, let's first see what the data set is going to be like and what are the different steps that we are going to inculcate in this particular project. So for that, I have taken a separate Power BI project. Now, I have broken down the steps at a very high level. So as you see, the first step that we are going to do is, we are going to evaluate the data set that is needed for this implementation. The second one is, once we analyze the data set, we are going to connect this data set within Power BI desktop. Now, once we connect this data set within Power BI, we are going to make some simple transformations followed by an advanced transformations within the Power Query editor. Okay, so then we will proceed further on with the data modeling part. So we will also try to understand how important is a data modeling in any project that we work for, and what are the important aspects of a design considerations when we design that particular model. Okay, so then we will go along with creating some basic tax expressions within this Power BI project, and we'll also try to understand how we can um, uh, formulate or place our specific measures that we've created to make ourselves reusable, and it is formatted or aligned it properly within that particular field section. Okay, so we will also go with some advanced tax calculations. So we will try to implement some advanced tax expressions, and we'll understand how it has been useful when you try to create such functions within a Power BI project. So now once we understand all these topics, so that's when we get into the reporting and the visualization part of it, where we try to build the reports and visuals that is needed for this project. Now, as we work on the visuals, it is also important that we should focus on the formatting part of it, which is the key element for any visualization. Okay, so let's get into the first part of this. So the first part is, we have to first evaluate what data set that we are going to implement within this particular project. Okay, so I already have that particular Excel sheet. So I have placed my required data set within an Excel workbook, and this data set has multiple tables. So I will go along with this data tables and help you understand what sort of a data has been stored in each of the different tables that are available within this Excel workbook. Okay, so as I said, this is going to be a sales related data with products and the customer information. So there are three different tables or the three different sales being split based on the three timelines, which is 2020 year, 2019, and 2018. And we have several columns along with this data. So you have this order ID, product ID, location ID, salesperson ID, customer ID. So we have the information related to the product's location and salesperson, along with the customer purchase date and the quantity that has been sold for that particular customer, and the amount that is related to it, right? And then we also have products. So where the products table is mainly focusing on capturing the product related information, like what is the product and what is the product ID related to it, and what is the cost of that particular product and the original sale amount, right? And if there is any discount being offered to that particular product, that value is also stored within the discount column. And then we have the current price and followed by the taxes column. So then the next table is about the location. So this location table mainly focuses about the uh, location specifics related to the latitude and longitude of that particular counties where this particular products or this particular customer is associated to, right? So as you see, the name is related to the customer, and this is the country code, the state, and the latitude, longitude, followed by other details of that particular location. Okay, so first let's try to get connect to a Power BI desktop, and then as we go along, we'll try to understand how this data can be transformed and what is the important columns that we need to focus on for this particular requirement. Okay, so I'm just closing this particular Excel workbook, and now I'll go to a new page and go to the home ribbon of my Power BI desktop. So this is going to be a very detailed step-by-step process like I did mention in the beginning of this video. So I hope you will be able to follow along my video to help you practice with the topics that I am going to cover in the next few minutes. So now I will go to this get data or probably select on this Excel workbook on this home ribbon, and then select the file that I have required for this particular analysis. So the name of my file is Power BI data, and I'll just select on this. Okay, so now the moment I've tried to select to that particular data set, Power Query or Power BI was able to fetch the data, and it's asking me to select which data I would like to import within Power BI, or which data I would like to get a copy of it from my original Excel workbook, right? So that it would retain within my Power BI desktop, and it's easier for me to access to and visualize the data within it. So what I'm going to do here is I'll just select all the tables that is needed. Okay, so I've selected all the tables, and then there are few options at the bottom of this navigator window. The first option is load. So if you think that your data is well organized and structured and there is no need to perform any transformations, right, you can click on a load button immediately, which would fetch or which will be imported directly within your Power BI desktop. Okay, but if you think that there is a need to go through this particular data set to evaluate if there are any unwanted columns, or probably you would need to perform some transformations within that particular tables, then my sincere humble request is that please do make use of this transform data. Okay, even if you are unaware of what needs to be done or how you can do it, I would suggest that please hit on the transform instead of load. Okay, now this is the Power Query editor. So the Power Query editor is the main part of this transformations, where it is important for you to make any sort of an ETL transformations. So what is a transformation? So transformation is nothing but probably your data might be recorded in a separate data set, like probably it's not structured in the format that you might expect, and you might need to uh, transform that particular data set as needed for your requirement, right? So those sort of transformations can be incorporated by making your use of this particular Power Query editor tool within Power BI desktop. Okay, now as we go along with this simple transformations topic, I will show you what are the basic transformations that we can perform within this Power Query editor. So all the transformations I make here, it's just to help you get understand like how powerful is this particular editor and how you can utilize it for your any transformations that is needed. Okay, so here as you see on this particular ribbon, there are many options that have been listed. So you can connect to a new source from this option, or you can enter some random data, or you can also manage your data sources with some parameters or the data source settings. And you also have some settings for your manage columns, like if you wish that certain columns within that particular table has to be removed, or probably you just need to keep only some of those columns, right? Or if you need to remove some of the rows within that particular data set, or keep only some of the data set, right? So all these transformations can be done with a click of a selection. So these are like you need not write any specific code within this tool. So all you can do is like search for that particular option within this particular tool or within this particular Power Query editor, and you can just select that option, and Power Query will help you to make that required transformation incorporated within your data set. So it's as easy as that. Okay, and so these are like other options that you also see, but I will just break it down to the main parts of this particular page. So the main sections that you should focus on here is the left side of the section where you see, right, the left pane. So this queries pane has the count of the tables that you have imported within Power BI query, and it also shows you the list of all the tables that you had tried to insert within this query editor. Okay, now in the middle portion of this page, right, on the top middle section, you see this formula bar where you can look at this particular code which has been written by Power Query behind the scenes, and you can also see below that the sample data set within that particular table. And towards the right side of this particular page, you see this important window which is the query settings. So within this, you have this properties and the applied steps. So the properties is nothing but based on the table that you have selected here within queries, it would show you the name of that particular table. But if you wish to rename this particular table, you can do so by coming to this query settings properties, and you can just rename the table name as you wish. And below that you have this applied steps section, so which usually captures or which usually records all the transformations that you might make within the Power Query editor. And this is quite powerful and helpful because at any given point of time, if you just wanted to relook at all the transformations that you have performed on this particular table, you can always come back to this applied steps section, and you can just navigate through the different steps that has been created for you. Okay, so this is quite important, and this is also very interesting feature within Power BI, because probably once your project is completed, and maybe after a quarter or a year or so, and if you wanted to look at what transformations did you actually perform on that particular data set, you can easily understand and relate to it by looking at these applied steps section. Okay, so we will carefully look at this particular applied steps portion throughout this project, and we'll also look at how these are quite helpful and interesting to you. Right, now let's make some simple transformations. So the first thing that I would like to do is renaming the columns or the renaming the tables that we have brought into this particular Power Query editor. So I'll go from top to bottom. So I'll just select the first one and name it as customers, and then locations. So there are two ways of how you can rename it. So I'm showing you both the options. The first way is that you can come to this properties pane and you can just rename that table name as you wish, or you can just double click on that particular table itself and give a name that is needed for you. Okay, so however you wish to, you can just do it. So I think the names have been okay. So I might need to rename this to a proper one because these are related to 2018 and it is showing me a different name within the sheet. So I'll just make that transformation or those corrections here. Okay, and this is 2020. All right, and the last one I'll make it as salespeople. Okay. So the first transformation is renaming all your tables that we've inserted within the Power Query editor. All right. Now the next transformation that we will be looking at is, so let's go by a table. Probably I'll go through this products table and see what are the different columns we have within this particular table. Okay. So as you navigate through these details or through this data, right? This column name, which is meant as a cost, right? So it is very unclear, like what cost is that related to. So maybe it's helpful that I can just rename this to a more um, better way, like a renaming this to make a better context of that particular column. So I've renamed this column to product cost. So how did I do that? Just double click on that particular header and it will allow us to make some custom naming that is needed for your requirement. Okay, so we have transformed that or renamed that particular column to product cost and everything seems to be fine here. So maybe we will go with the locations table and see if there is any transformations that we can make in this particular data. Okay, so what we can do is I'll just show you a few like make you accustomed with this Power Query editor transformation. So for that, what I'll try to do is you see this particular state column right now. On top of this, I would like to add some additional transformations. So whatever I do, um, maybe I will just okay, not format or yeah. Okay, maybe not this at the moment. So this seems to be good. So what I would do is, let's try to clean up this particular data set. So there are some unwanted columns within this particular locations table. So let's try to remove those unwanted columns. Okay. So what are my unwanted columns? I do not need this area code and I also do not need this household median income land area. So we can multi-select the columns by pressing and holding our control, and you can just select that particular column. So it's quite simple and easy. So if you are already familiar with using an Excel workbook, these functions or these selections are similar to that of it. Okay, so you just need to select the unrequired columns and you can just right click and remove those columns. So I'll just right click and say remove columns. Okay, so now those columns have been completely removed from my locations table, and as you see, this has been recorded within my applied steps section. So we've removed this column, so that's why you do not see that particular columns. But if you navigate through the previous step, you should be able to look at those columns being populated. See, area code is still there, and also the household medium income and land area, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is the cleanup that we wanted to do here. So next, what we'll try to do is maybe we will try to look at this other tables where we have sales 2018, 19 and 20. So let's see the structure of these three tables because I don't want to have some duplicate data being injected which would then impact on my overall performance. So I wanted to analyze what is my data structure within these three different tables. Okay, so this is for 2018 and 2019. Okay. So if you notice, The columns and the structure remains the same, except that the data has been segregated based on the different years that we see in the table name itself. Okay, so now what we'll try to do is we will go to this home ribbon and make use of the merge queries. So merge is nothing but, or maybe since it's the same structure, we'll use the append queries. So append queries would help you to append the data one above the other. Okay, so in this use case, as you see, the data structure is still the same. However, it's been segregated based on the year of that particular product being purchased. So therefore, we will try to use this append queries feature. So I'll just select this append queries, and in this window, I would select three or more tables. And here, since I already have this 2018 not table, I will select the other two tables and say add. So I'm selecting 2019 and 2020 and then hit on OK. Okay, so now the transformation has been completed. Now, how do we verify if this data is holding all the 3 years of records? So I'll come back to this purchase date column, and what I can do is I'll just sort this by descending. So now, if you notice, it has the records for 2020, and maybe if you just scroll through the data, you should also find for 2019. Okay, so which means that the whatever our requirement is to combine these three data sources has been completed successfully. Now, the next step that I'm going to do here is I'll just go to the other two tables which is no longer needed for my data model to be included. So I will just right click on this particular table, and if you notice, there are two options which are enabled by default. The first one is enable load and the second one is include and report refresh. So for this requirement, I do not need this particular table to be loaded within my data model. So I'll just unselect it. Okay. But I wanted that to be included with my report refresh. Okay. So similarly, I'll do it for 2020. So I'll disable this enable load. And then if you notice, it is being separated, or it's been shown like, okay, it's not been included within my data model. Okay, so the next transformations that we would like to do is, let's go back to the locations and see um, what are other transformations that we can perform. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'll just try to duplicate this column. So I'm just selecting that particular column and I'll bring it next to that column name itself so that I have both of them next to each other. Okay, so what we've done is I just wanted to create a column, the state copy, the state column as a duplicate column. So how did I do that? So I just selected this particular column here, right click on this column and say duplicate column. So the moment you say duplicate column, it would then create with the same column name with copy being attached as a separate column. Now what I wanted to do here is I will so what I can do is I'll just right click over here and okay, I don't see this option. Okay, so maybe okay, I'll go to this transform and um okay. So I wanted to capitalize this particular data. Um I'll just go through that option where I can find it. Okay. So within my transform option, like within my transform pane, and under this format, I have this option to convert this into an uppercase text. So I'll just use this as uppercase. Okay, and then I would like to split this column by some characters, or probably by the first four characters of it. So how do I do it? I'll just use the split column, and by number of characters. So when you hit on this drop down of the split column, you have several ways of how you can split this entire column. So in this case, I wanted to split it by the first four characters. Okay, so I'll just select specify it by 4 and split once as far left as possible and hit on OK. Now, you see, it's quite simple to do the split and transformation of that particular text within a specific column. So all I have done is that I've just selected that particular column and I went to this transform pane, and within this format text, I just selected uppercase, which helped me to convert my string or the text within that column in an uppercase. And once I have that uppercase format, I just split that column based on the first four characters. So I've used the split column functionality and specified the delimiter to be based on the number of characters, and there I've specified it as 4 number of characters. And that's how we have these two separate columns being created. Okay, so as you notice this applied steps section, all the changes, all the transformations that we've been doing till now had been able to record within this particular section. So if you wanted to go back to any of these previous step, right, so you can just navigate through that particular steps, and you can also look at that particular data, how it is getting changed or updated with that particular applied step or with that particular transformation that you have applied. Okay, so you see, it's all in real time, so you can still go through the different steps that has been produced as you are doing the transformations, and this is quite helpful and important. Okay, so this is just to help you understand like how simple it is to make or apply any transformations within the data set in Power Query. Okay, now next we'll try to create, so what I'll try to do is as I see the data set, I don't have a specific data related to my date related table. So what I wish to do is I would like to create a new table to have all my or to make use of the time intelligence functions that is needed for my visualization. Okay, but for that I can do that directly from my data model. So what I'll do is once we close this transformations tab, we will do that particular creation of a table. Okay, okay, so now let's try to organize our queries that we have within this Power Query editor. So what I would like to do is I will just select all my required tables like customers, locations, products, and okay, so I've selected all the tables and right click on the selection data and say move to group and new group. So in this I would create a new group called data group. Okay, or maybe I'll say data model. Okay, now it is more structured as you see here, right? So now you see the queries pane has been split into two separate groups. The first one being the data model, which I've named it for that group, and I've placed all the important tables that is needed for my reporting. And the other queries group is related to the um, tables which I no longer need it within my data model. Okay, so in this way you can just make it more organized to help you understand which are your key elements or which are your key tables for you to proceed on this particular data set. Okay, so now what we are going to do is, since we've looked at the basic simple transformations by using this Power Query editor, let's try to use okay, so um, yeah, so let's try to apply some advanced transformations. So for that, what I would like to do is, if you look at my locations table, right, I have data corresponding to California state. Okay, now I wanted to include or analyze my data for California with some population data as well. But since my current table do not hold that particular information, what I would like to do is I would like to use some data that is available on the web and combine those data sets for my further analysis. So let's see how we can do this particular requirement. So for that, all I can do is I'll just hit on this new source within my Power Query editor and select web. Okay, now, okay, so before that we need to have that URL, right? So for that I will go to a browser, and if you notice, I have already opened this particular browser by California demographics by population. So I will show you again how you can find it. So I'll just say California demographics data, and that should result me with this particular URL. So this is the URL that I wanted to use. So I'll just go to this and scroll through this particular data, where you will find California cities by population. So this is exactly what I'm looking for, because we already have this data by county, but we do not have it by cities and the population to it, right? So therefore, I wanted to make use of this particular data. So I'll just hit on this particular link below that, and I'll just scroll through the data. So this is exactly what we would require for a further analysis. So now I'll just copy this particular URL, come back to our Power BI query editor, and now I'll hit on new source and web. And within this URL section, I'll hit on this particular URL that we've copied. Okay. So, okay. So now we have this table within that particular data. So I'll just select the table and hit on OK. Okay, so now we have this new table being added to our data set. Now, what do I need to do? So I'll just try to rename this with a proper name. So I'll call it as California population data, or maybe just California population. And I'll add this data to my group, data model group. Okay, so now it seems to be good enough. Okay, so now that we have both the locations and the California population data being available within my data set, so the next part of my requirement is that we need to have this combined data set, which would allow me to perform the transformations or analysis that I can do with respect to the resultant data. So for that, we can use this function called, or the feature called, merge queries. Okay, so how do we do, or why do we do a merge query? So merge queries are nothing but when you'd like to combine different data sets together. It's similar to that of a join in SQL. Okay, so based on a common column, you would need to combine those two tables together. So let's see this with this particular requirement. So what I would do is I'll just selected this locations table and hit on this merge queries, and here you see that we have this locations table data being populated, and in the below you have an option to select a different table. So I've selected this California population table. So now how do I like to merge these two? So there should be some common column, right, based on which it can be combined. So I'll just select this name and city here. So, and there are different types of join conditions that we can use in order to combine this data set based on how your data has been uh, formulated, or how you would like to see the resultant data. You can choose the required join condition. However, if you notice here, it says the selection matches 74 of 74 rows from the first table. So which means that this is the perfect join to go with for this particular data model. So I'll just leave it as left outer join and hit on OK. Okay, so now we have this combined data set being created. But if you notice, the resultant data is not visible directly. However, it is in a table format. So now we would need to expand this table and use which data set is needed and probably do some cleansing of that resultant data. Okay, so what I would do here is I will just sorry so I will just expand this combined resultant data, and if you notice, it has given me the options to select which columns I require to bring into Power BI. So this is such an interesting feature if you notice, because before you even inject this table data within Power BI, it is asking you to select to bring in only the required columns within that particular data, so which would help you to improve the performance and also to maintain or do the cleansing of your data that is really needed. So I'm not focused on having the rank and city because that data is already available within my allocations table, but I'm just interested within my population column, so I'll just keep this population and hit on OK. Okay, so now we have just the population data being included within my data set of locations. Okay, so maybe we will rename this to a better name like California population. So I'll remove this suffix of this column name so that it's more understandable. And what I would also like to do is for this California population table, which is no longer needed for my further analysis, I will repeat the same step that I performed on my other tables of sales related one. So I'll just disable this enable load to make sure that this has not been included within my data model. Okay. So now I will move this to the other queries group. Okay, so now I have been able to organize all my required tables within my data model, and I've also tried to bring in some important data that is not available within the locations table. So for that, we've used the web data and we've merged the queries together to help us bring the required column. Okay. Okay, so that is about the advanced transformations. So as part of this advanced transformations, we have looked at how do we merge the queries and bring in the required data set, and how we can remove the unwanted columns to not be reflected within that resultant data. Okay. So the next one is the data modeling part. So I think pretty much we've covered all the important elements of transformations that you can perform within Power Query Editor. So there are many other options that are also been there, but for this particular data set, since it's almost good enough to treat for our further analysis, we have not looked at other options. But as you see, there are plenty of options that are available, made available for you just to hit on that selection, and that would just do the job for you that is needed. Okay, so I will just save these changes. I'll just hit on this close and apply, and I'll come back to this Power BI desktop. Okay, so it's trying to load all those changes within my Power BI desktop. So as you notice, until now it has not brought the data within my Power BI desktop tool. So how benefit it is to analyze such kind of a data set, right? It's truly an amazing feature that has been incorporated within Power BI desktop. All right. So the next part of this project is that since we've done some basic transformations and some advanced transformations to clean up our data to make sure that it is in the ready to go with our visualization part of it, the next part that is important is to look at the data modeling part. Okay. So what is data modeling? So data modeling is nothing but organizing our tables and relating them to each other with the appropriate um, filter connections. So we will go through that in this particular example. So here, if you notice, Power BI has that intelligence to identify and relate those tables based on the columns that is available within those two tables. However, as a first suggestion, please do not follow the default relations that has been provided by Power BI. So let's go by the scratch itself, and we'll try to understand why that is quite important and helpful. So the first thing that I would proceed here is I'll just remove all these relations that have been created by Power BI on its own. Okay, so I'm just removing. So how you can remove it, just select this particular line, the relation line, and right click and say delete. Okay, and even this particular relation, so I'll just right click and say delete. Okay, so the next one that we have to focus on is making this data, or make aligning these tables in a more structured way. Okay, so for that, the key thumb rule here to look at is place all your lookup tables on the top. Okay, so please place all your lookup tables on the top, and all your uh, fact tables below the lookup tables, and I will tell you the reason behind it. Okay, so the first thing I would like to do is I'll just bring in all the lookup tables and place it on the top. And okay, so we have okay, so I'm just trying to expand these to make it little appealing, because they are not in the same size, right? So I'm just trying to bring it together. And okay, okay, so we have these tables here. Okay, now um there is one more table that is needed for our further analysis, which is our date table. Since if it's always recommended that if you have to use some time intelligence functions within your reports, right? Try to use a separate date table that would give you the leverage of implementing those time intelligence functions within Power BI. So, what I would try to do here is I'd like to create a new table. Okay, so how you can do that? I'll just come back to this data view and say new table, and call this as dates. Okay, and use the DAX function called calendar auto. Okay, and that's it. So see, it's quite it's quite simple and easier as well. So in order to create a date table, you just need to make use of a simple function or a simple DAX expression called calendar auto. So by making use of this calendar auto function, Power BI has helped us to create the date table within a few seconds of time. Now I'll come back to this data modeling, and I will just place this dates table next to my customers and bring this fact table below this. Okay. So now that we've organized the tables together in the right format, I so let's understand what is meant by a lookup table or a data table, and what is meant by a fact table. Okay, so lookup table is nothing but it's um, the dimension table that would hold all the primary keys within that particular table. Okay, whereas the fact tables are the ones that hold the transactions of that particular lookup tables. Okay, so as simple as that. Now we placed all the lookup tables on the top in a sequential order, and the fact table below that particular lookup tables. So since we only have one fact table here, it's just lying in here. Okay, now let's try to create the relationships or define the relationships. Okay, so I'll try to expand this a little bit. Okay, so for this sales people and sales fact table, the main or the common field that I have, or based on which I can relate these two tables, is by using the salesperson ID. So all you can do is just select the salesperson ID from your salespeople and drag and drop on the other field in the sales table. So that's how you can create a relationship between those two tables. So this is one way of doing it. But you can also do the same way by going to this manage relationships and specifying how you wish to create the relationships. So you can just hit on new and specify which table to which table and based on which cardinality and direction, and that should be enable you to create the relationships. Okay, so here from the products table, I'll use this product ID and drag and drop on my product ID within my sales table. And for location, location ID and customer ID from a customer's table and date from this and purchase date. Okay, so now all the tables have been related, and as you see, all of them have this cardinality of one to many, and this is quite important. So make sure that when you are able to when you are trying to define a data model relationship, right, try to ensure that it has one to many relationship. Okay, so you see, so one to many is nothing but, so in this particular table, sales table, there is one person who has placed multiple sales. Okay, so that is a possibility, right? And one product being sold by multiple, like sold multiple times. Similarly, location. So that's why the relation or the cardinality has been chosen as one to many. Okay, so what I would try to do here is, sorry. So now, if you are trying to, so this is also important to understand like how the flow of data has been visualized, right? So your flow is always in the direction of this particular relationship. See, so it will go in this particular direction, and we'll understand that as we progress in the next transformations that we incorporate within this project. Okay, so now that we've understood what is meant by a lookup table and a fact table, and how do we create relationships among the different tables, and we've also tried to create a new table for the dates functionality. Now we will proceed with the DAX calculations. So, what is DAX? So, DAX is an acronym for Data Analysis Expressions. Okay, so, data analysis expression or the DAX expressions are quite extensively used in any Power BI project because it has a lot of ease and flexibility to reuse it with multiple other expressions. So, you can create a DAX expression for one specific logic, and the same function or the same calculation can be reused within another expression. So it gives you with the reusability of the existing one with the dynamic nature within that expressions that you have used within the data. So it is recommended that you to please make use of as many DAX expressions that is possible to make sure that your data that you are assembling within your visuals are dynamic in nature. Okay, so for this tax expressions, we will be making use of two things. So one is that new measure or a new column. Now, what is the difference between new measure and a new column? So I've already created another video explicitly on this particular topic, and I will leave that link in my description so that you can refer to it if you require further details to it. But as a quick comparison, new measure is something that is quite helpful, where only that particular logic will be computed as you use it within your visual. So so that particular logic or that particular calculation would be stored in the RAM, and it will not be saved within your data model or within your data, so which is quite important as well, right? Whereas when you use a new column, right, when you create a calculated column, this would actually create a additional column within your data set. So which means that it will take some space within your data, and it will also impact with the overall performance of your report as well. So make sure that most of the time to make use of the measure functionality rather than a column. Explicitly, if there is a need to go with a column, please do not choose for that option. Okay, so now let's try to use or create some basic simple DAX functions and see how we can make use of it. Okay, so what I would like to do is maybe I'd like to, okay, let me see what data we have here, and sorry, okay, maybe, okay, so I'll go to the sales table and create a new measure within this sales table, and I'll call this measure as quantity sold. Okay, so we already have a quantity. But I would like to show you like how important or how flexible enough to make use of this tax function. Okay, so I'll create a measure by name quantity sold, and what we are trying to achieve here is just do a simple sum of quantity. So I'll say sum of, and this table that is a quantity. So okay, so that's it. So that particular measure has been created. Now, what we try to do is, I will like to analyze this data set probably by a customer name and apply this quantity sold. Okay, and I'll also apply this quantity. So if you notice, the default quantity that comes in from the table and the measure that we've created, both of them are giving the same resultants. But the difference is that the default measure value that comes in from the table is a implicit measure, which means that if you wish to use a different aggregation, there are only limited aggregations that can be achieved on that particular measure value. So for example, on this sum of quantity, right, which is coming directly from the table, if you just select that and go to this summarization, right, you will notice that there are only few aggregations that you can just use on that particular measure, right? But the other measure that we have created, that is referred to as an explicit measure. So just to information, I've also created a separate video on this particular topic, implicit versus explicit measures. So if you wanted to have some further understanding on this topic, I will leave a link in the description for your further requirements. Okay, so this is called as an explicit measure because the DAX function that we have created a quantity sold, right? So here you can actually make use of other expressions as well, like make use of other DAX functions that is needed for your requirement. So you're not just limited to only a set of aggregations that you have seen with the other column, right? So you have that ease to expand that particular aggregation to different types of aggregations. Okay, so that is the major difference to help you use the DAX functions instead of using the default measures within that particular table. Okay, okay. So then let's also try to okay, so this is one topic that I wanted to bring it up to your notice. And what else can we do? Okay, now that we have several things, since we will be creating some DAX expressions and measure values, right? So let's try to organize these into a more structured way. Okay, so let's try to create a separate folder for these measures that are important for our further analysis. So what I would like to do is, I would like to go back to my measure tools. Okay, so I've just selected this DAX function that we've created, the DAX measure that we've created, quantity sold, and which would help us to highlight this measure tools. Now, in this particular measure tools on the home tab, um, home ribbon, you have this called enter data. Okay, so you just select this enter data and give a name to this particular table called maybe key measures, or whatever name that you would like to give, you just give that name and hit on load. Okay, okay. Now if you notice, yeah, so you notice that this key measures has been created here. So it is similar to the other tables that have been displayed within the fields section. Okay, but it has no other field. Now what I would like to do is, I'd like to bring in this quantity sold within my key measures. So what you can do is, like just select this quantity sold, go to the measure tools, and on this home ribbon, you see the home table has been related to customers. So now just select that customers, the drop down next to that customer's name, and select that to key measures, because I wanted to place that quantity sold measure within my key measures table. Okay, now I'll try to remove this column 1. So I'll just right click on that column 1 and say delete from model. Okay, Now that has been deleted. So now we have quantity sold within my key measures. So if you notice here, the key measures, the measure group that I've created now, right? The table that we've created now. So this has got a different icon representation next to it. See, and it has also been occupied the first place preceding the other tables that are there within my field section. So, which means that these measure groups are always taking the precedence over the other default tables that have been inserted within Power BI desktop. Okay, and also the icon representation of the table is different. All right, now let's try to create another measure group for simple measure, or maybe we'll say that as time intelligence, but probably we'll do that as we follow along. Okay, so at the moment we do not need it, so I'll just leave it there and we'll try to create some additional DAX functions. So I'd like to create a new measure now, which what we'd like to do is probably we'll try to get the total sales value. Total sales, so sales based on my quantity and price. So if you come to my table, we have this quantity and the price values being provided, but I do not know what is the total sales that is relating to it, right? So I don't have the total sales value. So how do we calculate the total sales? It is the um, multiplication of price and quantity. So when you multiply quantity with price, you will get the total sales that is achieved for that particular product. Now we will have to apply the same thing here. So if you go back to this particular table, right, sales table, so I'll select the, yeah, sales table. So if you notice, within my sales table we have this quantity and price, and what we are trying to achieve here is we need to calculate the uh, expression that evaluates the quantity and price multiplied by each other, and on top of that we would like to get the total sales value for that particular product. Right now, if we have to apply a simple sum expression, right, the sum will only return that particular uh, row level context, but it cannot apply it on a specific expression. So therefore we would need to use the other function called where is this, yeah, total sales. So we will use the other expression called sumx function. Okay, so I'll use the sumx. So what does the sumx function do? So as you see, sumx would take two parameters. One is the table and the expression. And the expression is nothing but quantity multiplied by price. And then it will take a sum of that entire table. So that is exactly what we are looking for in this particular requirement. So I have to just specify from which table I am looking at to evaluate this resultant. So I'll specify the table name as sales 2018, and then I have to give that expression. So what is my expression here? So my expression is quantity multiplied by price from the same table. Okay. Now we have this total sales. So what I would try to do is I'll just select this data and add this total sales. Okay, so if you observe here, we have this total sales next to this. So what I can also do is we'll try to do this formatting. So I'll just select this measure from my key measures folder and go to my formatting pane and select dollar. Okay, because it's a sales value, right? So I've added a dollar to it, and yeah, so this looks fine now. All right. So we have created the total sales value and we try to insert within that particular table. Now let's try to calculate the total transactions that has been uh, evaluated based on my sales value. So how do I do that? So I'll just create a new measure. So I'll call this as total transactions. Okay. So total transactions, and in order to get the total transactions in that particular sales table, so it's like the number of transactions, right? So how do we get it? So we just need to get the count of the rows within that particular table. So in order to get the count of table, so if you go back to the table data, right, the data view and select the sales table. See, so the total transactions are nothing but the count of rows in that particular table. So in order to evaluate the count of rows, we have an expression called count rows. Okay, so how do we like to calculate on which particular table we are trying to get the count rows, the number of rows in that particular table? So it is based on the table sales table, right? So I'll just select the sales table and hit on enter. Now let's try to bring that into my existing table. Okay, so if you notice here, we have now been able to calculate the quantity sold, total sales. So, okay, let's try to remove the second quantity. I'll remove it from my values. Okay, so now we have quantity sold, total sales, total transactions being captured here. Now, what do we, or probably we'll try to, yeah, so just select this table. I'll reorganize it. Maybe I'll bring down this quantity sold below my total transactions. Okay, so now this is perfectly ordered. Now let's try to calculate the total cost. Since we already have the total sales, let's try to calculate the total cost. Okay, so the total cost based on the product and the quantity. So how do we do that? So I'll create a new measure again. Okay. I'll call this measure as total cost, and I would use in the similar way the expression. Okay. And from this particular table sales, and what are we trying to achieve here? So this has to be, since it is a total cost, we have to multiply the quantity by the product cost. So where are we getting the product cost? It's from the products table, right? Now in order to compute this resultant expression coming in from a different table, we have another expression called related. Okay, so let's try to see that particular expression. So I'll say quantity coming in from the sales table multiplied by, now I'll use this related table which would return that specific value coming in from a different table, right? Because this product cost is related in the, it's existing in the products table, that's not lying within my sales table, so I have to use this function called related expression. Okay, and what is this column name? So that is, I think it is product, maybe I'll just specify it. So within this product cost. Okay, so now that we have this particular expression complete, I'll just hit on enter, and I'll try to bring in this total cost value within my table, and I'll also try to format it with dollars. Okay, and I'll also try to change this total cost measure to be part of my key measure. So I'll go back to my measure tools and home table and select that to key measures. Okay, so now I have all my measures that I've created for this particular calculations, and we also have added this particular data within my table. So now we have the customer wise total sales value, total cost, the total transactions, and the quantity sold. Okay, so we have all this information. So what you can also try to do is you can just realign the columns in a way that is more easier to read it. So I'll just place this total cost next to my sales value. Yeah, so now it looks perfect. Okay, so now that we have the total sales, the total cost value, let's also try to bring in the total profit. Okay, so in order to calculate the total profit, how do we do it? So So profit is nothing but based on your sales and your cost value, right? So when you get the difference between your sales and cost, that would evaluate the total profit for that particular product. So let's try to create that particular measure now. So I'll just say new measure and call this as total profit. And as I said, it's the difference between the total sales and total cost. Okay, and hit on enter. Now we have this total profit, and I'll change this to key measures group. And I'll also try to select this table and add this total profit and format it with dollars as we did earlier. And maybe I will bring this. Okay, perfect. So I've reorganized all my data within this particular table. So as you notice, now we have the profits, sales, cost, and the transactions along with the quantity sold. Okay, so next what we'll try to do is, okay, so now that we have the total profit value, let's try to evaluate the profit margin as well. Okay, so again we'll try to select this new measure and name this as profit margin. Now, how do we evaluate a profit margin? So, profit margin is nothing but when you divide profit by sales value, the total profit by total sales value, that's represented in a percentage, it is a profit margin. Okay, so I will use the function called divide, which would basically do the same resultant, like you are dividing a by b. So you just give that numerator and the denominator value and how that resultant should look like, and that should calculate that particular resultant. So here the numerator would be our total profit, which we've already evaluated it, followed by total sales. Okay, now there is an optional value which is the alternate result. So alternate result is nothing but in case there is no value being generated out of that resultant, which value should that be populated against the resultant data. So if there is no value, then it should result with 0. Okay, and I'll hit on enter. Okay, so now that we have this profit margin being created, I will convert that into a percentage by coming to this formatting, and I will just reduce that, okay, I'll leave it by 2 decimal places. And I'll also change this to key measures table. Okay, now let's try to add the profit margin. Perfect. So now if you notice, we also have the profit margin values being added up next to that particular column. Okay, so far we've been able to do different sorts of calculations within DAX as part of the DAX calculations, and we've also looked at like what are the different functions that would help us to achieve that required data set. Okay, so now let's further proceed with some advanced DAX calculations. Okay, so what I'd like to do here is I'd like to select this particular table and yeah, so I'll just place this towards the left side of it, and maybe I'll remove my or I'll just keep it. So for the time being I'll leave it as is. Okay, so now in the advanced DAX calculations, let's try to do some time intelligence calculations. Okay, so for that I will have to use my dates table. Okay, so before that let's try to create a new table that would capture all my time intelligence DAX measures so that it's all organized in a better way for further reusability and restructure. So I will come back here and hit on this new enter data and give a name to this table as maybe time intelligence, and I'll hit on load. Okay. Okay, now we have this been created. Now, what do we try to create here? Uh, okay, now let's try to create some DAX functions. So, I'll just create a new measure. So, what logic we'd like to calculate is we'd like to calculate the last year sales, or probably before that, let's try to bring in some data set and try to evaluate it. Okay, so I would like to bring in my date and total sales. Okay, and this is my table that has been created, or this is the view that has been created now. Okay, so by default, this date would have taken this hierarchy. So I do not want that to be in a hierarchy format. So I'll just change that to a date. And okay, so I think I also need to do some formatting. So I'll just select this date column. And since the data type is date and time, I'll just select that as a date. Okay. And I'll also try to change that to another format like yeah, ddmmyy. Okay, probably in this format. All right, so now we had aligned or formatted our data column within my dates table in a way that is needed for me. So we have this date and your total sales value being shown up, and I also wanted to add a slicer. So I'll just select this date and convert that into a slicer. Now I'll change this to a date and um, okay, I'll just see. I wanted to have that, okay. So I would like to change this to a date and hierarchy. Yeah. So now we have this slicer, right? Now, yeah. So we have a slicer being added up on our data that has records from 2018 to 2020 years. And we have also a table that is captured with the data and the total sales. All right. So now I would like to evaluate the uh, last year sales value for that particular table. Okay, so the previous year sales, right? Or previous year or the last year sales. So for that, let's try to create a, so I'll select this time intelligence table and try to create a new measure to evaluate this last year sales. Last year sales is, so how do we evaluate this last year sales value? So we will use this calculate function, calculate, and based on the field total sales, so that we've already created. So I'm just using that, reusing the existing DAX function, or the DAX measure that we've created earlier. So that is my expression. Now, in order to get this last year sales value, right, so we use a function called same period last year. Okay, so I'll use the same period last year and that is based on my date field. Okay, so within my date, I'll say dates of date. Okay, all right. Now, what we'll try to do is I'll come back and keep this somewhere to 2019, maybe for a lesser amount of data. Okay, so I'm just reducing this slicer data by selecting it. Now what I'll try to do is I'll just select this other table here and bring in this column that we've created, or the measure that we've created, last year sales, add it up to this particular table. What we can also do is I'll just select this last year sales value and format it by the dollar value, because it's also a currency, right? Okay, so now it's perfect. So we have this previous year sales value. So if you notice in this table, right? So same period last year would evaluate. So these are the dates, right? The different dates. So this 27,000 that you see corresponding to March 6th, 2019 year is related to previous year same period, like 2018 March 6th. Okay, and so 6/3/2019, right? And if you go to this see through this data, right? So this is how it has been evaluated. So it's a very simple straightforward DAX functions, so you need not write multiple complex logics to evaluate this particular requirement, but you can just make use of this existing function within DAX. Okay, so you can just apply this function that would evaluate the same period last year value based on that particular time frame that you have selected, and that should give you the resultant. Okay, so why do we use this calculate function? So calculate would help you to change the context of the filter, right? So this function, right? So calculate is helping you to change the context of the filter. So why do you need to change the context of the filter? Because you don't need to evaluate the sales value corresponding to that particular date next to it, right? So you wanted to evaluate or get the data for that same period last year or data. So you have to get the records from the prior year based on the current row of value. So due to that, you are specifying or telling Power BI that this is how you have to consider the context of my filter, right? So then let's try to evaluate another a DAX function. So I'll just create another measure to evaluate a cumulative sales value. So how do we calculate a cumulative sales value within the Power BI? So again, we will use this calculate based on my total sales. Okay, now in order to evaluate the cumulative sales value, I will try to use. Okay, now we will use another function called filter. Okay, and all selected, and within this dates, and shift and enter to go to the next line. So shift and enter, when you specify shift and enter, it will go to the next row within that formula bar, and then say dates of um, okay, dates of date less than or equal to max of dates of date. Okay, and I think another parenthesis. Yeah. So hit on enter. Okay. So I will explain these functions, but before that, let's try to add that cumulative sales value within this particular table. All right. And what I'll also try to do here is I'll try to use this date and cumulative, and based on date. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's try to understand this expression here, what I've written. So what I'm trying to calculate is cumulative sales. So cumulative sales is nothing but, so for example, if I'm trying to evaluate cumulative sales value for this particular date, right? So for 21/12/2019, then the cumulative sales value would be evaluated based on the previous sales records until then. So it will add until that sales value and give that as a cumulative sales value. So for that, how we have created the logic is by saying calculate based on the total sales value, but we are also saying please filter the data for all the dates, because if we do not use this filter expression, then it will not consider all the records, so it will only evaluate for that particular row alone otherwise. So we need to have the prior records as well, right, to be considered. So therefore we are saying all selected dates, all the dates within that particular table based on the condition that we are applying as a filter here, and the condition is this particular logic. So the condition is that in order to evaluate the cumulative sales for 21/12/2019, we need to add the total sales value until then, like prior to those values. So this is the maximum value, right? And prior to those this particular dates, we need to get all the sales value and add it up together, and that should give the cumulative sales for that particular date. Okay, so that is how this particular function has been evaluated, and the cumulative total sales value has been shown up on your graph. Okay, so this is how you can make use of different DAX expressions, and you can also reuse an existing measure that you have created earlier within another DAX function. And this is why it is always recommended to make use of DAX functions within your Power BI reports. Okay, and also try to organize these measures in a separate folders like this, what we've seen here, because that would then help you to structure and navigate to those particular data. Okay, so this is about the DAX functions within Power BI. All right, so now let's try to build the report that we've seen earlier, right? So let's try to recreate that particular report. So if you notice in this particular example, what are the elements that we have used here? So we need to show the total sales by county. So I have created all the measures that is needed here, like the total sales and the total profit, and that's why we've created those DAX functions. Okay, so now let's try to organize them in a way that is needed for our requirement. So the first thing that I wanted to show up is total sales by county. So I'll just select the total sales and county, look for county, select this county, and this should be, donut chart. So I'll just bring in here. Okay, and I'll go to this format, and okay, I don't need this legend, so I'll just disable this legend for the time being, and I'll also go to this detailed labels, and here the label contents that has been displayed can be changed in a way that is needed for you. So if you want just to show the category and the data value, you can just select that accordingly. So it all depends on how you would like to display the data on your particular data set. Okay, so first thing is, let's try to add the title over here. So I'll just call this as sales performance overview. I'll just select bold and give it a different color, maybe blue, and I'll increase the font size to 28 probably. Okay, and I will place this as the title for this particular report. Okay, so the first part of this element is structure. All right, the next we have the total sales by date. Okay, so I will again select total sales and by date, and choose this from remove that from date hierarchy to date, and I'll place it next to this. Okay, so we have this total sales by date and total sales by county as well. So next we have to display the total sales by customer name. Okay, so I'm just trying to, yeah, okay. Total sales by customer name. So now I'll also try to bring in total sales. So you just select this total sales and customer name and change that to a clustered bar chart. Try to little expand it and bring it over below this donut chart. Okay, I'll try to reduce this width and probably increase the height. Okay, and okay, so we are also displaying the data values next to it, right? So what I can do is, okay, trying to expand it a little bit more. Okay, so I'll just select this particular visual here and I'll go to this formatting this visual and okay, I don't think the labels for my x and y axis are needed, so I'll just remove it because we anyways have it by the title itself. So I've removed it and probably this is needed x axis but not the title, right? So I'll go within this and turn off the title to it. Similarly, within my y axis, I'll turn off my title and yeah, and for the values, the data labels, right? So I'll turn it on and then I should be able to see the data values. Okay, all right. So this is done. And then we have this total sales by product name. So I'll just try to copy this visual and copy paste by Control C and Control V. And all I can do is this needs to be by product name, right? So I'll just search for product and I'll remove this customer name here and bring in the product name on my axis. And you see, so it retains that formatting that I've applied on my other visual. So that is the ease of using the Control V option by Control C and Control V. And yeah, all right. So then the next one is total profit by store location. So I'll select this map and bring that over here. I'll just adjust this size. Okay, perfect. So now what we wanted to display is total profit by store location. So I have to use total profit and location. Okay, so for the location, we have latitude and longitude, right? So what I'm going to do is I'll just bring in this latitude onto my latitude data label and the longitude on my data field, and then I should have this map being generated. Okay, so what you can also do is try to increase the size of the bubbles if you wish. So you for that you can go to this format visual, go to the bubbles and maybe try to play around little bit with your existing bubble size. Okay, so I just increased it a little bit. Okay, and then okay, so next what I'd like to do is let's try to bring it a little bit up and this also a little bit adjusted. Okay, next even here I don't want to show this label, so I'll just go to the formatting part, go to x-axis and turn off my title for my x-axis. And similarly for my y-axis, I'll go to this title and turn off for that particular y-axis title. Okay. And the next thing that I wanted to do is I'd like to bring in the KPIs next to these visuals, right? So what are my KPIs? So I wanted to display my total sales as a card. So I'll go to this format of this visual and try to reduce the size by maybe 32. Okay, yeah, this size looks perfect. And maybe I'd like to give that a different color. Okay, we'll see that formatting. So next what I'll try to do is I'll just copy paste this cards. Okay, so I'm trying to copy paste. Okay, so I've used five different KPIs, right? So I just copy pasted that particular existing sales card multiple times so that I have all of them here. So what I try to do is I'll just replace that metric by another fact. So here I wanted to display it by profit. So I'll just select total profit and quantity sold, and so the third one is by quantity sold, and next we have the total transactions. So I'll go to this fourth one and total transactions, and then we have the profit margin. Okay, so I will add the profit margin. Perfect. So now we have placed all the KPIs that is needed for this particular visual. So I think we had been able to accomplish the most of the data. Only pending item is adding up this particular filters or these slicers on the top. So for that, let's try to add this date and change that to a slicer, and probably change this to a date. Okay, I'll remove it. So I'll bring in this date and change that from hierarchy to date and transform this into a slicer. Or okay, but if you notice, we are not displaying this as a slicer, right? But rather as a date, individual year-wise data. So what I would like to do is I'll bring into this other one. Okay, now I will just remove this other date parts within this hierarchy, and I'll just keep the year one. Now, in order to have such horizontal alignment, I need to just select this slicer here, go to my formatting, and within my general, I should have an option to. I think my yeah. So within my orientation, I just need to change that from vertical to horizontal. Okay, and then adjust my. Okay, yeah, perfect. All right, and I also do not want to display the slicer header. So I'm just removing the slicer header, and I'll try to okay restructure it. Perfect. Now if you select, yeah, the data is showing as is. All right. Now, similarly, I wanted to display this based on my quarter. So I'd like to add another slicer based on my quarter selection. So for that, what I'd like to do is I'll remove this. Okay. So I'll just keep my quarter, and again I'll go back to that slicer settings format and change the orientation from vertical to horizontal. So I have that like this. Okay. So I'll just place it next to my ears, and I also wanted to disable the header of my slicer, and then I'll try to place them properly. Perfect. All right. So now if you select a specific quarter and if you specify a specific year within that particular slicer, your data is then been selected accordingly. Okay. Now I'll just go back to my actual visual, and if you notice here, if I make any selection within my donut chart, right, the data is getting filtered out to that relevant data on my other visuals, right? So how do we change this accordingly? Because if you notice now, it is just highlighting that corresponding data in that other visuals, but it's not filtering the data, right? So how do we do this? So I have to go to my format and edit interactions. So now you see all these icons next to it. So here I would like to keep this filter option. Okay. And select filter, and instead of highlight I'm selecting the filter, and I'll say remove. Okay. Okay. Now if you select this data, it should filter that corresponding data. Okay, let's see that again. So okay, everything else is doing. Okay, now, yeah, earlier I was not able to see that particular filter option, so I've just placed it a little bit below for my ease. Okay, now what I would like to do is I'll just select this and go back to my format and remove this edit interaction, so that now if I make any selections, right, I'll not see those interactions ka filter options. All right, so now my data is looking proper. Like now if I select these, okay, perfect. So now that the basic design part is completed, but we are still left over with the formatting part of this particular report. So how do we do this? So first, I'd like to use this themes that has been provided by Power BI. So I can just come back to this themes option, and I can just choose like a which theme I'd like to apply on my report part, right? So here I'd like to use this blue theme, and probably what you can do is you can just apply a different color by coming to that particular visual and change the color. So I'll just select this bar chart for the moment and go to this and columns, and here if you see this has been chosen as this color, but I'll give this color here. And to the sales column, I will come here and choose a different color, like probably this. Yeah, so I'm just giving a different blue color assigned for every visual, just to make sure that it stands out within that particular report. Or maybe another color like I think, okay. And also for this, colors, I'll select, or maybe it's too dark, like this. Okay, and now for this visuals also, you can just come here and choose a different color, and so what you can do is like you can just select control and give a color that is there. Okay, and what you can also try to do is I'll just select all these cards, and okay, so I'll just reduce this by 11. Okay, all right. Now I think I have to align on these things, like to place this. Probably the formatting also I'd like to change this by the value, right? Yeah. So I'll just make this in displayed in millions. So it is so both the sales and profits are displayed in million unit, and yeah. So now this looks good, and probably what I can also try to do is probably for all of these can select them, multi-select, and come back to this label, and maybe you can give a different color. Okay, perfect. Now let's try to align these. Okay, now everything seems to be aligned perfectly. And now the next formatting that I wish to do is I'd like to add some colors to this. So I'll just select the slicer here, come back to my format, and slicer settings. Mm, So I wanted to, okay. So the default color is black here, right? For the selected, so that is like that. But for the unselected, it should be in blue. So I'll give a color like this. Yeah. And maybe the font color to be in white. Okay, similarly for the other one, so I'll give the font color as white, and the background color to be blue, or maybe the other blue. Okay, perfect. So now based on my selection, that particular year has been highlighted in a black color, while the others unselected data has been shown in a blue color. Okay, so perfect. So I think my filters are working perfectly as I wish to have. And another functions or features that I wanted to highlight here is specifically for the slicer, right? If you go to the slicer settings, so yeah, so within my selection, so here, depending on how you wish to allow the filter selections, you would need to come to the selection options and enable those options and disable it accordingly. So single select, when you enable it, it will not have you the flexibility to select multi values within that particular slicer. Okay, so by default it is turned off and gives you an option to multi select with control. So if you wanted to select for both 2018 and 2019, you can just press your control and press and hold your left mouse button, and that should enable you to select multi values selection within your respective visual. Okay, so that is about this one. And show all option is also not by default enabled, but if you wish to have an all option being added to that particular slicer, you can just enable it. Okay, so there are several formatting options that are available for every visual, so you can just go through them, and I hope that will help you to extend your project a little bit more. So this is all about the end-to-end implementation of a Power BI project in terms of how you can analyze your sales performance overview. So what we have done is we went through the different portions of options. Like we've tried to create it, some simple DAX expressions, and then we've also done some advanced DAX expressions. We try to do some transformations using Power Query Editor, and we also looked at the data modeling part of it and how we can align it together by creating the different relationships among tables. And we've tried to compare the data by different columns or different data, and we've created some basic charts that is needed for our reporting purpose, and we've tried to do some formatting as well. So I hope this video is helpful for you to get started to become a expert in Power BI project. And if you do like this video, please do not forget to like, share and subscribe, and thank you.